Hey team, and welcome back to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. I apologize for not being on camera with you guys. I was not feeling 100%. Felt like I was maybe getting a migraine. I didn't want to be staring into my recording lights while I was doing this, but so I hope you guys don't mind me doing this a little bit more podcast style, but I'm sure I'll be back with you guys next time. Today we are going to talk about our magical electional opportunities that we have between our Aries new moon on April 19th or 20th, depending on where you all are on the world, until our Scorpio full moon on May 4th. And these are eclipses, the solar Aries eclipse and the lunar Scorpio eclipse. So whenever we get into eclipses, of course, they're always a little nerve-wracking for people. They tend to signify big change when they signify things at all. And so, especially when we're coming at this from like a magical tradition, historically, it is ill-advised to do magical operations around or involving the eclipse. So that is something that we adhere to here, and something that I recommend following in everybody's personal practices as well. But even though our new moon is an eclipse, it is still a new moon, and this time period will be covering a waxing moon phase. And waxing moon phases are usually really great, just because they tend to be more growth-oriented, and it's much easier to utilize talismanic elections during the waxing moon period for things that, you know, people tend to want. People tend to want to gain things or increase things or augment things. So it becomes a little bit easier to find talismans that we can more practically apply to a purpose or, you know, something that we're after than it is for like the waning moon, which is a little bit more about giving back and giving away and reducing, which are still important processes in life, but they take a little bit more tricky, sneaky to get something more obviously positive out of them than the waxing moons, which is more obvious. And so today we're going to cover 3 different electional opportunities for everywhere in the world should be able to utilize these for the 6th, 7th, and 11th lunar mansion. So let's go ahead and dive on into it. Kind of like I said, our first electional opportunity is going to be for the 6th lunar mansion. And the 6th lunar mansion is one that is really focused more on relationships, whether that's building relationships, establishing relationships, or finding relationships, or, you know, helping to augment or smooth out relationships, whatever the case may be. The 6th lunar mansion is very helpful in helping to get this process started or maintained or fixed or kind of whatever the issue is. So the 6th lunar mansion can be very useful for somebody who is getting back into the dating game for whatever reason. Maybe even somebody who's been in the dating game for a long time and hasn't really found anybody that they've connected with, or it just hasn't quite worked out. The 6th lunar mansion can be very helpful for that. Somebody who maybe is in a relationship but is going through a difficult time, the 6th lunar mansion can help you kind of reconcile and understand each other a little bit better, help you to open up and feel safer in sharing like what the issues are, that kind of thing. So basically just like any sort of situation where there is a relationship that has a need that or a relationship need that needs to be met. The 6th lunar mansion is very helpful for, and I like to encourage people to explore and work with this a little bit more, especially for people who are looking to like find someone, because the 6th lunar mansion can help you kind of point towards people who have certain characteristics that you might be looking for, you might do well with. So something to keep in mind with that. The 6th lunar mansion is always very helpful for getting people together and keeping people together. Okay. But taking a look at our election for the North American continent, this is going to take place on April 23rd at basically 5 in the morning. This chart is set for like 4:59. I don't know why I couldn't just make it 5 o'clock, make it easy on myself. But in this election, we have the moon in the 6th lunar mansion, and she's applying to the conjunction of Venus. Obviously, super helpful. Venus, a planet that is all about relationships, love, and connecting, really helping kind of bring that together, bring that home. We weren't able to get the moon in like a better situation. Mercury is kind of the star in our elections this time around, because almost everything that I tried to do, the reason why there were only 3 elections in this, almost everything that I tried to do Mercury interfered with, because being retrograde makes it more difficult to work with. So it was either Gemini or Virgo rising when I wanted an election, and you can't do that with Mercury retrograde, or the moon applying to Mercury, and you can't do that when Mercury's retrograde. It just seemed like anything that I wanted to do, Mercury had his grimy little fingers in it, making it impossible to work with. And so that was kind of the issue with this. I wasn't able to get this application or the conjunction of Venus and the moon on the ascendant, because Mercury would rule the ascendant and it's retrograde, and we can't do that. I couldn't get on the midheaven because then Virgo would be on the ascendant and Mercury was that, and it was just a nightmare. So for this, I could only get the moon in the 3rd house, which is their house of joy, which is fine. but definitely not I would have preferred the 11th or something like that. But Moon in the third house, applying to the conjunction of Venus. The ruler of the first house in this chart is Jupiter, who is placed in the first house in Aries, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Jupiter's far enough from the sun to not have to worry about combustion anymore. So all in all, just a good, solid chart for the 6th lunar mansion here. So definitely look into that if that is something that you're interested in pursuing. The Western European version of this chart, of the 6th lunar mansion chart, takes place on April 23rd at 11:51 a.m. And this was one a little bit more like I wanted the North American version to look like, but I wasn't able to get it. But here, kind of the same thing. Where you have the moon in the 6th lunar mansion, and she's applying to the conjunction of Venus. Venus, the planet of love, relationships, harmony, getting along, mediating, understanding one another, is a really great partner for the moon to apply to with this kind of talisman. So we're always really glad when we can get a really specifically topical planet to connect with the moon when we're doing these lunar mansion charts. So it's always really nice when we see it. But this is kind of more what I wanted with the North American chart, where I wanted this to take place more in the 11th house. Here we're able to get the moon as the ruler of the first house. The moon is in Gemini, far enough away from the square of Saturn to not worry about it. No aspect with Mars, not combust the sun or anything like that. So we keep the ascendant safe, we keep the moon safe, and that's all we have to worry about in this chart. So another just a really solid, really strong contender for a 6th lunar mansion talisman for Western Europe. And then finally, our Australian version of the 6th lunar mansion chart takes place on April 24th at around 3:55 in the morning, so about 4-ish. And here we have kind of a more similar setup with the North American chart than with the Western European chart, where the moon is now in the third house in the 6th lunar mansion, but now she's not applying the conjunction with Venus like she was in the other two. Instead, now she's applying the sextile, with Jupiter. And I think this is really interesting because this is another case of veneration. The moon separating from one benefic and applying to another. I think Hellenistic astrology refers to these things as like an enclosure, with besieged being sort of like the negative one. So if the moon or any planet is going from like Mars to Saturn or Saturn to Mars, that's a bad enclosure and it's called like besiegement. But the good enclosures between Venus and Jupiter, and even the Sun to some extent, are called venerations. And so just a really nice, a very well-supported moon in this one. So while we're kind of missing that very specific signification of Venus as like a planet that naturally signifies love and relationships that we benefit from in the North American and the Western Europe and North African charts, absolutely we will. This moon kind of loses that very specific signification to get kind of powers from Jupiter, who is another planet that I wouldn't say no to when it comes to like establishing relationships or helping to smooth things out in relationships. Jupiter's also, a benefic planet who wants to confirm things and wants things to get along, so that can absolutely work. But now it's like this extra supported moon who's cushioned on both sides. So even though we've lost that very specific signification from Venus, this moon is probably actually better placed. This might actually be the better 6th lunar mansion chart. So there you go, Australia. So Jupiter is that ruler of the first house with Pisces ascendant, which is free from the afflictions of Mars or Saturn. Jupiter's far enough away here to not have to worry about combustion. We're now just under the beams, which isn't too terrible. And again, just a good connection. Always very nice when we get these moon benefic planet conjunctions in lunar mansions that they can be very helpful for. And we're just kind of riding that. We're just kind of riding that wave since we didn't get any Venus and Taurus elections. This is like the next best thing. This is like our bronze medal Venus and Taurus election, a 6th lunar mansion with the moon and Venus conjoined. All right, so our second electional opportunity for this waxing moon period is going to be for the 7th lunar mansion. And the 7th lunar mansion is a really good one because while it is sort of focused on material gain, so like financial profit and things like that, it's also useful for the acquisition of all good things. So it in general has a strong kind of wish-granting power to it, which makes it very helpful and very flexible to be able to answer and respond to a number of needs and situations, which often makes it, kind of like highly prioritized. I don't say highly prized, so I don't think that's good for it. Highly prioritized for individuals to be able to utilize and work with when they have a situation that it can be, applied for. So seventh lunar mansion, acquisition of all good things, very useful, very flexible. Definitely recommend it if you're in a situation to where you could acquire a good thing. And obviously there's a lot of, that's where the flexibility comes from, right? There's a lot of kind of leeway there about like what exactly that means. Because a lot of things can be considered good things as long as they kind of help you advance or grow in some way. So looking at our election chart for the North American continent to start with, this is another one where we have the moon in the third house. I'm sorry, I keep saying lunar mansion when I mean house. And this was just another instance where I wasn't able to get the moon on the ascendant or the midheaven or the 11th house without having to work with a planet as a rule the first house that I didn't want, namely Mercury. So we have the moon here in the third house, which will work fine. And at this time, she's applying the sextile to the sun. And the sun is a really good, handy planet for when it comes to, like, especially goal setting, like knowing what your goals are, having a thing, like your eye on, like the whole, like, eye on the prize kind of situation, yeah? To where the sun is definitely like that vision, that goal, that focus that you can kind of strive and achieve for. So the sun's energy can be very helpful for seventh lunar mansion kind of acquisitions or gains. At the same time, we've got Mars as a ruler of the first house. Mars is down here, unafflicted by Saturn, unafflicted by the sun. We also have Jupiter, a very handy Jupiter on the first house cusp here to kind of help balance this, to help give this a little bit more stability and support, which is very nice. You could also do, I'm going to say this. I was going to say you could also do a time with, you could also do a time. The moon will stay on the third cusp, which is fine. You could also do a time if you preferred Taurus rising to get Venus as the ruler of the first house. That can work too. You'll kind of lose the Jupiter stability, but I don't know. Maybe you like the Taurus rising better. But I think the 25 degrees Aries rising is a little bit stronger. But that is going to be the seventh lunar mansion opportunity to take a look at and see if it works for your location in North America. Our seventh lunar mansion opportunity for the Western European and Northern African continent happens on April 24th at around 5:42 in the morning. That's what this chart is set for. And in this chart, we're going to have the moon again in the third house because of Mercury. Thank goodness. Thank God we have Mercury retrograde. And the moon in this chart is actually going to apply to that Jupiter in Aries. So Jupiter is a benefic planet. He wants to confirm and stabilize. He wants to say yes to things. So Jupiter can be a really good force to work with for these kinds of kind of more flexible, or some people might say vague, more positive, the sort of more vague, more positive lunar mansions. Because it gives them a lot of flexibility for their powers to kind of decide what to do or be directed to do a certain thing if you prefer that. And Jupiter's really great for that. So this one you can have a little bit of a choice in, I think. You can do the Pisces ascendant to get Jupiter as the ruler of the first house. I think that's a good fit. But you could also do the Aries ascendant to get Mars as the ruler of the first house if you wanted to. I think Jupiter's a little bit better capable here, since now we're dealing with this combustion being separated, and we're dealing with more being like in the beams. I think Jupiter's fine here. Mars in fall, I don't really care that much about. It can be a fine significator for the ruler of the first house. I don't really see that as an issue. So just kind of whichever sign you prefer, which maybe whichever one you're able to get more easily, or if you have, like, if Pisces or Aries is more emphasized in your natal chart, maybe that can help you decide which sign you prefer. But either one can be very good, and that is going to be that opportunity for Western Europe, North Africa. And then Australia continues to have, in my opinion, the superior charts, just because they're able to get the moon and Venus in, or not Venus necessarily, but because they're able to get the moon in a better house than the third house. Not that the third is a bad house for the moon to be in lunar mansions, but the 11th is better than the third. So we're just kind of dealing with that, like, how much can we get out of this kind of a thing. But the Australian version of this chart takes place on April 24th at 13:10, so about 1:10 in the afternoon. And here we're going to have, the moon in the 11th house, which is nice. And at this time, she's applying that sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter, another, like I said before, a benefic planet who wants to confirm and stabilize and say yes to things. He wants things to be able to grow and to flourish and to be in environments and to create environments where that growth and flourishing is possible. So really kind of wide powers there to make that happen. So really great for something that's a little bit more vague or flexible in its exact manifestations, like the 7th lunar mansion. The moon is going to rule the first house in this chart with the 25 degrees Cancer rising. The ascendant and the moon are unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. And yeah, so just all in all, just a nice situation here. Probably the best of the 7th Lunar Mansion talismans available is going to be the Australian one. So if you have a friend in Australia, have them make one for you. So our final election opportunity for this lunation, for our 2-week period here between eclipses, is going to be for the 11th Lunar Mansion. And the 11th Lunar Mansion is one whose powers kind of converge in such a way to make it very useful for kind of climbing the corporate ladder, like career opportunities. So the 11th Lunar Mansion is said to increase wealth, protect property, useful for career advancement, specifically like gaining favors or attention from authority figures. And so it's this kind of like combination of increasing wealth and gaining favors from authority that have allowed it to be sort of like the career climbing ladder, the career ladder climbing talisman, because generally you have to like negotiate with your boss, right, for whatever your salary is. So it can be very useful for people who are looking to renegotiate salaries, who are looking for raises or promotions, or even new jobs. Entirely, the 11th Lunar Mansion is super helpful for. I have a long history working with this Lunar Mansion for people. I recommend it all the time to get you where you need to be, even if you don't think that where you're going is what that is. I don't think that made any sense. But what I mean is that a lot of times people go to the 11th Lunar Mansion to get a specific job, and then they don't get that job, and they're very sad. But then they get something better than what they were thinking about going for the first time. So there's sort of like this like door shut, door open kind of action to be open with for the 11th Lunar Mansion if you choose to work with it. Because just because you don't get the job that you thought you wanted, it's because there's something else that you didn't know that you needed coming up. And that's the word of wisdom with the 11th Lunar Mansion. So you're worth more than you know, and the 11th Lunar Mansion knows it. But taking a look at our electional opportunities for this talisman, the North American version takes place on April 28th at 1722. And here we've got the moon in the 11th house. I did it. I did it, y'all. The moon in the 11th house. And at this time she is applying, circle her, applying the sextile to Venus. I don't know where that was going. The sextile to Venus. And Venus is a good planet to go with here, a benefic planet who wants to give things. So she herself is very interested in growth and finances and increase what's her word? Lifestyle inflation. That's what Venus likes. Venus likes lifestyle inflation. And so we're going to weaponize that in a little bit to increase our earning potential, which Venus is very, very happy with. Our ruler of the first house is going to be that Venus here with Libra rising. We're not worried about the square with Mars. It is very far from the ascendant, so we're not in the danger zone there. And Saturn is also kind of out of the way. We don't have to worry about it. The moon, similarly, we've got quite some time before we have to worry about the opposition with Saturn, but this is kind of where we start closing that door a little bit, we'll say. And then all in all, just a good kind of solid, solid opportunity here, especially for people who can kind of utilize this Mars a bit more heavily. So people in Mars years, or who have Mars natally in the 10th house, could probably do really well with this chart specifically, or who work in Mars-related fields. That could be really good too. Just a way to think about that, kind of conceptualize or kind of more purposefully utilize election placements that are in kind of topical positions. The Australian version of the chart. How the turntables here. Because in the previous ones, I feel like the Australia charts were always able to get the moon in like the 11th house, and now they have to have the moon in the 3rd house. Ha ha ha. So same story here, I suppose. We've got the moon in the 11th Lunar Mansion in the 3rd house here, and she is applying that sextile to that very helpful benefic Venus, who is going to help us get what we deserve, what we need, and what we want. Interestingly, Venus also rules the 1st house in this chart, as Victoris is on the ascendant. You know what I don't like? I'm not a big fan of the Saturn here, actually, now that I think about it. We might want to back this up to get Saturn further away from the ascendant, because while I wouldn't say that they're exactly conjoined, so I usually give 5-degree ranges for the ascendant. So like 0 Gemini to I hate drawing with this, to 5 Gemini. Well, not 5 Gemini. No. 0 Gemini to 10 Gemini. I would say we're in the no-no zone when it comes to the ascendant degree because of the Saturn square. So what you could do is if you don't like this connection here, that's fine. You can back this up to you can back this up later if you wanted to maybe about like 20 degrees, because at the same time you wouldn't want to get Mercury on the ascendant, so keeping Mercury 5 degrees away from the ascendant is very important. So you could probably do a time more like this, which is April 29th at 8:04 a.m., so just about 8 o'clock. That'll back Saturn up away from the ascendant's square, which can probably give you a little bit of breathing room. The moon is still applying the sextile to Venus. She's still in the 3rd house. And you can do kind of something similar, because I think it's interesting that there's a malefic planet in the 10th house in both of these 11th Lunar Mansion charts. Well, both so far. I don't remember if it's in the if it's in the Western Europe and Northern African one right now. I'll see in a second. But you can do kind of that same thing. You can actionize it a little bit more. People who are in Saturn-ruled years, people who have Saturn in the 10th house, or people who are working in Saturn-oriented careers can get a big kick out of Saturn being here. Like, we can actually utilize that a bit more purposefully, rather than just kind of having Saturn hang around here. I don't think it's going to be a huge thing for people who don't fit those criteria. I think anybody could still get a good use out of this. But since it's here, we can kind of use that energy to springboard off of for people who, are in positions to be able to do that. Haha, nope. The Western Europe North African version does not have a malefic planet in the 10th house. But their version of the 11th Lunar Mansion chart is going to take place on April 28th at 1942, so a little bit before 8 o'clock. And they're going to have the moon in the 11th mansion in the 10th house, still applying that sextile to Venus, so everybody gets some Venus action here. Where Venus is going to be that benefic supportive influence that gets you where you need to go. So make sure that we focus on that. Venus is going to rule the 1st house, so we're going to signify, the person for the talisman is for, and she is unafflicted by Saturn, unafflicted by Mars, unafflicted by the Sun. The moon is also, so everything that we kind of want to have in this talismanic collection chart is here, and everything that we don't want is safely, kind of away, something that we don't have to worry about. But all right, everybody, thank you guys so much for being here and, listening in and listening to me cover these election opportunities. The eclipses coming up can be really daunting for people who have kind of sensitive points around these, but you can utilize, astrological magical talismans or principles to help kind of augment or kind of create little, safety bubbles around these things. So like, for instance, somebody who has maybe the eclipse happening like on their midheaven or in their 10th house, or with the, in a difficult aspect with the planet that rules their 10th house, they could use an 11th Lunar Mansion talisman to help make that not as big of a deal, because the 11th Lunar Mansion can kind of fight back against that by creating more positive energy in like career type areas. The same thing we could say about the 6th Lunar Mansion for somebody who the eclipse is happening, maybe in their 7th house or conjoined their 7th house ruler or something like that, kind of creating a little bit of a cushion there to push back on whatever kind of chaos or something that the eclipse might create. So that's another way to think about astrological talismans. They can be really helpful to get us things if we need them, or if we're in a situation where we're wanting to accomplish more, but they can also just be used as like general safeguards against kind of difficult or scary looking transits or activations or something coming up a little bit down the road. So it's always very handy to kind of have one eye looking out at what's coming up, and then another eye kind of being a bit more focused on what's happening kind of right around the bend, to see if there's some way that you can maybe smooth things out a little bit. But that's all I have for you right now. I'm looking forward to being back with you on camera next time, where hopefully I won't be borderline migraine-y. And thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you guys on our Scorpio eclipse.